A couple of weeks ago, I got a message from Lenno of Nolltronics.com asking if I was interested in receiving a Multisteno for review and feedback. So obviously I couldn't say no to this, even though it is the middle of the semester, and unfortunately I do not have a whole lot of free time. So I wasn't able to do a full in-depth review and sort of unboxing of it, but I am here and I'm going to try and make a video showcasing some of its features, what I think about it, and whatnot. So I first thought I'd go over the key switches, because that's one of the most important aspects of a steno keyboard. Now, in the past, I've always used the term actuation force to describe how much force you have to apply to actuate each key, but that's a bit inaccurate because in steno, you're always actually going to be wanting to bottom out. Because the feedback you get from pressing each key isn't from seeing the words on the screen, because of course, the stroke is only sent to Plover once every single key has been released. But instead, the only feedback you get when writing a stroke is if you've reached the bottom of the travel. So really, the force you want to be looking for when deciding between weights is the bottom out force. If you look on any data sheet or any store selling these chalk switches, they'll say actuation force of 20 grams, which is not the same thing. In a key switch, you're always going to be actuating before you actually bottom out, and as I mentioned with steno, you want to find out the bottom out force. And unfortunately, it's a bit more difficult to find the bottom out force for these chalk switches, but I did look online and I found a graph, which I can put here, purporting it to be about 25 gram bottom out. Now, a lot of people who have had a Multisteno and a Uni have talked about how the spring-swapped Uni, that is with 20 grams like I have here, actually feels a lot lighter than the Multisteno by default. And that is actually true because with the 20 gram springs in the Uni, it bottoms out at 20 grams. Now the Multisteno bottoms out at 25 grams with its default springs, even though it has a actuation force of 20 grams. So in my previous videos, when I've talked about the Nolltronics boards, I've unfortunately not made that distinction clear between actuation force and bottom out force, so I am going to put a little correction under my hardware guide video. That said, my advice is still the same. Whichever keyboard you can get is still going to be the best one you can get your hands on. Now you might be wondering, okay, what about spring swapping one of these Nolltronics boards? It is definitely possible, but I think spring swapping one of these boards is a bit harder than, say, a Uni. But actually, you don't really have to do that because even though it is slightly heavier than the Uni, the 25 grams is a pretty good compromise. Personally, for me, it is a bit too heavy, but for a beginner or anyone who's under 3 strokes a second will have no problem with the 25 gram springs. One thing I should mention is that even though the bottom out force in the Multisteno isn't significantly heavier than the Uni with the springs swapped, it still feels quite a bit heavier, and the reason why is because the travel in one of these chalk switches is actually much lower than the Gateron clears in a Uni, for example. So this is another aspect of the key switches I thought I'd talk about, and that is the key travel. So if you look at it, each key doesn't move that much, right? It's only about maybe 3.5 millimeters, something like that. If I compare it to the Uni, it moves quite a bit more, maybe even 4 millimeters. Now, I actually have O-rings in both of these, so the travel in both cases is a bit less, but it's definitely lower in the Multisteno. I can definitely feel that, I bottom out a lot quicker. And that's actually something I really like about a steno keyboard. So when I first got the Multisteno out of the box and started writing with it, I forgot how I missed the low travel of these chalk switches, so that was something I really appreciated. So even though the key switches on the Multisteno and by extension the EcoSteno feel a bit heavier than the Uni with swapped springs, it's still 25 grams, which is actually a pretty decent bottom out force. So it's definitely a good beginning weight, and it'll also serve you well into the future. And you can swap the springs later. You can find either Alps or Chalk's springs. I have a link in the description showing one place you can buy them. Now, it is probably a little bit more convenient if you buy springs with the Uni and just get it from stenokeyboards.com, but again, there are other features of the two keyboards, for example, that you might want to take a look at. Now, before I go into those aspects, I thought I'd sort of just show a little comparison between the two keyboards and the weights of the switches. Alright, so I mentioned that I spring swapped both of these, but I did put the original springs in the outside number keys. So in the Uni, I have it here. In the Multisteno, I have it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the bottom out force of both of these default switches, just to show that even though the switches on the Multisteno and EcoSteno feel a bit heavier, they are actually within range of one another. So let's tear this, and now I'm just going to add some quarters until it bottoms out. Unfortunately, the scale isn't nearly as accurate. Sometimes it registers, sometimes it doesn't. All right, so it's almost there. I think one more and then it'll bottom out. Yeah, that's it. It's completely reached the end of its travel. So let's just put this back on. So it's about 26 grams. Obviously, this isn't going to be very accurate, but that is pretty close to the purported 25 gram bottom out force, so I'm pretty pleased with that. Now let's try the Uni, and that's bottom out. It is still a little left, but I'll just say this is about 35 grams, so there. Bottom out force of the chocks on the Multisteno are indeed 25 grams, and bottom out force on the Gateron clears on the Uni are indeed 35 grams. That's 20 grams, so bottom out force is 20 grams with the spring swapped Uni. And that's 20 grams, and that has completely reached the end of its travel. 22 grams, but it's about 20 grams, I think. Now, that said, even though I have swapped the springs on this Multisteno, I can confirm with other people it does feel heavier than the Uni, and I think that is due to the reason that with the Multisteno, you're applying the same force over a shorter distance. So with the key switches out of the way, I thought I'd talk about the layouts of the Nolltronics boards. Now, I mentioned when I first got my Uni, I couldn't use the layout for like 5 minutes because my thumbs just would not get used to the more extended position. With the Multisteno, it has been a bit worse than that. I haven't really been able to get used to it because by default, the vowel keys are these two keys here, and the inner keys, the keys close to the center, are actually the number keys. So that means my thumbs were curled in like this, and that just didn't feel right. So at first I tried looking for some firmware to fix this. I thought someone may have already done this. Turns out someone hadn't. So I had to actually remap it in Plover and try it out like that because I didn't have the time and didn't want to try and mess with QMK at that point. But I did manage to get used to using the thumbs on the center. And that actually worked quite well, and I've been using this for a few days, and it's quite nice. I actually like it a lot. Despite having to get used to the layout, it's been just as fine. So I used to say that when it comes to hobbyist boards, layout of the thumbs is the most important. I think that's something that can be adjusted to, but your mileage may vary. Since I've been using the Multisteno as basically my only steno keyboard for a few days, I decided to compile some firmware to swap the locations of the vowel keys. So normally they are outside here with your thumb curled inwards, but now I've got some firmware to map them to the center keys where your thumb is extended outwards. So if you go over to github.com/joshuagraham/steno firmware, you can find the firmware files I have added. So they're under Multisteno, of course, and they're all of these different files. You might be wondering what the in and out is for these different firmware files. The in or out refers to your thumb position, so if it's curled in or if it's curled outwards. You can also think of it where the number keys are. So for out, the number keys would be on the outside, these two keys here. For in, the number keys would be here. So that's just the little swap I mentioned earlier. I've talked about the key switches, I've talked about modifications to the springs, I've talked about the modifications you can make to the firmware, and also the layout of the thumbs. Now, one thing I haven't really addressed yet is all of these extra keys. It's not immediately clear if you're looking at a steno layout what these are for. Now, on traditional steno machines, you'll typically have a number bar above this row. So this, instead of being individual keys, this would be one entire bar that you just be able to press with any finger. It would all do the same sort of function. And that's the same thing that's happening here. So all of these keys actually do the same function, and that is they are the number keys. So you can press it with any finger you want, and it will do the same sort of thing. Now, on some boards, they don't have a number bar, and the reason for that is to save switches. So the Multisteno has got these thumber keys just sort of for, I want to say accessibility, but there's probably a better word for that. It's just for folks who are more used to using thumber keys. Now, of course, for me personally, the thumber keys and the number keys are kind of useless for me because I use top S number key. But the reason why I wanted to try out a Multisteno was because of the QWERTY capability. So on the Multisteno product page, we can see that we have a whole bunch of different modes. So first of all, there's Gemini PR mode. This is the default mode and the one you probably spend most of your time in. The second one, so if I press toggle mode, see the LEDs are now all off, so I know I'm in mode 2. If you have your Multisteno in NK rollover mode, you can just turn on Plover, you select keyboard, and you can steno as normal. Now, if you're using a computer that has access to, that's able to read Gemini PR, I wouldn't really recommend using this. Where this layer is handy is in something like Dotterel, the Android steno engine. It doesn't have support for serial protocols just yet, but if you use your Multisteno in NK rollover mode and connect it to your phone, you can use steno on your phone. The next mode, of course, is QWERTY, and see the red light is now on. So I've never used this just yet, so that's backspace. Okay, but, oh, that's enter, that's not space, okay. I should, oh. And of course the last mode is symbol layer. Hold symbol button down. So if I hold this down, both LEDs come on and there are a bunch of symbols here. Why you would ever use this if you have Emily's symbols or something like that, I don't know, but it's there. Now just looking at the pictures on the product page, I just realized I completely forgot to talk about what comes out of the box. And of course, this gorgeous case. Unfortunately, I've got it a little dirty already because I've not really been using it. I just stored it in a dusty place. But let me just unplug this real quickly so I don't press anything. We have the steno, which goes in this little slot. Might be upside down, or maybe it doesn't matter. But anyway, it goes in here, and it is just gorgeous. I mean, look at that. It is such a solid and well-built case. I did get a case from my uni, but it's actually very cheaply built, so this in comparison is just amazing. The build quality is just astonishing. Of course, there's a divider here and a little pouch for your cables and some Nolltronics stickers. So yeah, the case is just amazing, and it is probably the only, I believe it is the only keyboard that comes with its own case. You can get other cases for other machines, so for example, let me get my uni and its stethoscope case. So this is a very cheap case that I bought off of eBay, and I mean, it looks kind of disgusting. It was kind of smelly to begin with, but the uni goes in there, and Peter recommended you get a stethoscope case because they are perfect size. You can probably get a much better quality stethoscope case, but having one that comes with a keyboard is definitely such a nice perk. So far I've gone over most of the things that the Multisteno has. I think that's about it, with the exception of the tripod mounting screw. Now, I mentioned in my uni review that you can actually use, oh, also in my hardware guide, you can actually use a phone tripod mount. You can use a phone tripod mount with the uni to go in here, and then of course your 1/4 inch nut for the tripod. Now, a lot of folks have tried this, and I've heard that this isn't the most stable option, and actually, definitely in my experience, it is a bit wobbly. Personally, I don't have any issue with that actually. I have a video I can put right here of me stenoing on it, and it looks like it's sort of just wobbling back and forth. But if you're not really comfortable with that and you want something a lot more solid, this nut embedded in the Multisteno and steno is just completely solid and it won't move at all, even if you're putting a lot of force on its sides, which is really nice. Ironically, I haven't used my Multisteno on a tripod because one thing I really love about it is its low profile switches, so I can just put it on a table and I can just steno on it really comfortably. In fact, I've actually had an idea for a setup on my desk with my computer, and it works really well. It saves some space, and I have my mouse on the table so I can just grab for. With the uni on the tripod, it is nice and very ergonomic and comfortable, but if I have to use my mouse, I have to move my hand up and move it back down, and it's a bit of a hassle. I've gone over most of the features, I think. I'm probably going to stop recording and immediately remember something that I didn't mention and really hate myself for. But I am now going to plug it in, and I'll just end this video with a monkey type test. So I haven't quite gotten used to it, but I do hope I can get some decent speed. Alright, 162, so I'm a bit nervous right now, but that's pretty good. For 48 seconds, I'm happy with that. So, I hope my sort of ad hoc review of the Multisteno has been helpful to you. Of course, because I am in school right now, I started not high school 2 months ago. I haven't had the time to do sort of my regular scripted and in-depth review of it, but I do hope this has been still informative, helpful, and maybe even entertaining. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.